I just want to start my simple remarks by, again, reiterating our strong support and appreciation for the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is a gem right in our midst. And I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you with the greatest respect for our veterans and soldiers today. Days like today, moving about freely to exchange ideas and enjoy the freedoms we have in this country wouldn't be possible without your dedicated service throughout time and your pledge to continue to serve in the future. Today we are going to hear from someone who exemplifies the title of her address in so many ways. Major General Marcia Anderson is going to tell us about how it is not where you start that matters, it's where you finish. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to listen and listen closely. Now, Major General Anderson, she's from Chicago, or I'm from Chicago rather, but I've heard a few things about the little town called Beloit. Yeah? A little something about Beloit. Not only are you within range of your lifelong posse, you have the firepower of the entire U.S. Army Reserves behind you. So I'm going to make this quick and get out of your way. After all, you are the highest-ranking African-American woman in the reserves, and we are so honored to have you share Veterans Day with us today. Now, your credentials are impressive, but very military to civilians. So I know that you were Acting Assistant Chief and Deputy Chief of the Army Reserve, which makes you a senior advisor to the Chief on policies and programs for the U.S. Army Reserve, including force structure, Congressional budget and appropriations process, development of human resources and personnel policies, as well as Department of the Army and Department of Defense matters. That's a whole lot, and that sounds really important. Her military education includes the United States Army War College, where she was awarded a master's degree in strategic studies. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Creighton University and law degrees from Rutgers. That's okay, it's Veterans Day, so we give her the respect she deserves. Her military awards and decorations include the Legion of Merit with 1 oak leaf cluster, Meritorious Service Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, Army Commendation Medal, Army Achievement Medal, Parachutist Badge, and Physical Fitness Badge. As a citizen soldier, Major General Anderson is employed by the United States courts, where she serves as the Clerk of Bankruptcy Court, Western District of Wisconsin, located right here in Madison. Please, ladies and gentlemen, now you can stand and welcome Major General Marcia Anderson.
Thank you very much. Please sit down. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Patrick, for that really wonderful introduction. And I still have to tell you, after all this time, I still wonder whom they're actually talking about, because I don't really know that person. But I hope that at the end of my remarks here, you'll know a little bit more about me. And I certainly want to add to the debate and the discussion and some of the wonderful programs that have been going on here the last 2 days. And I am absolutely going to make sure I leave time at the end for questions, because I think that's where we all actually learn a lot from each other. Faculty, students, staff, guests, and of course, the veterans who are with us today. And I want to add something to what Mr. Sims just asked. If anybody here, beyond the veterans who have served or are serving, if any of you have family members who have served or are serving, could you please stand? Look at that. You deserve a round of applause. Because one of the things we know, and I know as a senior leader in the Army, is that family members are very much a part of our team as well. We couldn't do what we do. We couldn't do the traveling and some of the assignments that we have without your support. And so I wanted to give you a thanks, too, because today, Veterans Day is also, I think, in large part about you and your contributions. Although I wasn't able to attend yesterday, I could see from the agenda that I had a chance to look over. You had some amazing topics, and it clearly, and I'm pretty sure it led to some very spirited discussions. And I think it was especially timely and thought-provoking. But my charge today is to kind of provide you with my personal perspective and a little bit about who I am on the importance and value of not just having a diverse organization or society, but an inclusive society. An inclusive society. I obviously don't hold myself out as an expert on this topic, but I do know a couple of things that one of my girlfriends used to call true truths. First, I think we all are well aware that we live in a very complex and very, very global environment. And that means that businesses are not going to survive or thrive if they don't embrace diversity and inclusion. There's clearly a business case for this. It's probably a chat yesterday about that, because it does more than just sustain their bottom line, it improves their bottom line. And it also, as a business case, confirms that it's not just about numbers, not having large numbers of minorities and women. It's about having an inclusive organization that includes those individuals as part of your senior management in significant numbers. The second truth I know is that our public institutions also benefit from being diverse and inclusive. You have to have the ability to have debates on policies and programs and initiatives that include the unique personal perspectives that everybody brings to the table. This leads us to more creative and innovative results. There's no doubt in my mind. And then last, as a country, I think it's long past time for us to transcend the description, and some of you may be aware of this, that from Mark Twain, who said, "War is a way for Americans to learn about geography." We have to get past that. And I would also add, it's too often the only way we gain some cultural competency about other cultures. Because I'm not saying that we're not curious, but I will say people until a few years ago probably couldn't find Iraq on a map, couldn't find parts of Africa on a map. But today we know where Sierra Leone is. We know where lots of other those countries are. So let's kind of try to transcend that. So I'm going to start with a little talk about my personal journey. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of you in certain parts. And I bet if I asked everyone in this room to tell me where they're from and what inspired you to follow a particular personal path, you'd have all kinds of different stories. But I think we'd also find that there's a lot of commonality. I would also bet that your personal stories are just as interesting as the areas you hail from. A lot of you may be from very large urban areas, or like me, from little tiny Beloit, Wisconsin. I didn't hear a lot of people say Beloit when I was, well, okay, never mind. Anyway, but I think that the important point I want to leave you with here today is, as the title of my speech indicates, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. It's not about your zip code. It's not about whether you hailed from Vera Court here in Madison, or as I did, and you'll find out later, I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. Which, if you know anything about that, doesn't look a lot like Madison, put it that way. But that journey, those experiences formed my outlook on who I am and who I am today. Now, I agreed when I was asked by Mr. Sims to participate in this year's Diversity Forum because I really believe deeply believe that racial and gender dynamics in our country are changing, and they're changing quickly, maybe even quicker than some of us want to acknowledge. We need to address some of our long-standing issues, and it's because it's going to ultimately help our communities, and it's going to help you as a community here at the university. Now, I can't stand up here in uniform and not shamelessly plug the Army Reserve. They'll drum me out if I don't say something. So here's my public service announcement for the Army Reserve. But seriously, it played a tremendous role in who I am today, that experience. Those young cadets you just saw from the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, they're going to be me in 30 years. And the professors of military science who are helping form them are doing a huge, huge job, because the people you saw today, one of them could very well be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So their education in this larger university environment, their experiences, their exposure is all extremely important. I think we can all acknowledge, probably every single one of us in this room can acknowledge, that we're pretty fortunate and lucky. We live, and I know I do, in a very different world than my parents and my grandparents experienced. They had limited career choices. Some of it was because of educational, but some of it was because of their access to education or their access to jobs and opportunities. But our choices our opportunities are only limited by our imaginations and our own personal drive and motivation. That's really all that holds us back. Now, as I said, some of you are from a certain area, and you probably pretty much have your path charted. But I started out in East St. Louis, Illinois, after we moved from Beloit, Wisconsin. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. Zip code 62205. It's not like Beverly Hills 90210, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Back in the 1950s, late 1950s, it was named an all-American city. At its height, it had a population of about 82,000. As of the last census, it's around about 23,000. Now let me tell you how it got there. Industry left. There were changes in the meatpacking and railroad industry. A lot of industrialization left East St. Louis. And with that, the tax base and jobs. And so there began to be a shift. Right about now, I'd say about 70% of the population there is African American. Over half of it exists on incomes below the poverty line. And less than half of the high school students, I should say, graduate from high school. Now, I work with some organizations here, community-based organizations here in Madison, and those statistics are very similar, actually, for some communities here in Madison. So not necessarily that different. But as I said, East St. Louis went from a small, thriving city to one that one commentator described as America's Soweto. Think about that. Went from being an all-American city to being described as America's Soweto, with the statistics and demographics that I just told you about. So few people looking like me, standing in front of you today, were ever expected to emerge from East St. Louis, given those demographics and those statistics. But that's where I grew up. My mom scraped together the money to send us to Catholic schools. She patched our pants when she couldn't afford to buy us new ones. She also found the money somehow to make sure we had magazine subscriptions. I know for you young students, you're like, what? Paper in the house? Yeah, so I read Ebony, I read Jet, yay for Jet and Ebony. But we also had Newsweek and Time. And the common thing about all those was that she wanted to show us the opportunities that exist. People that are doing things and being successful. So we would have a rich variety of role models to look at. And I'll tell you, I never felt deprived. I didn't know we were poor. I didn't know anything about that. I just knew that I lived in a loving family, and their expectations were that I was going to work hard and succeed. She made sure we got to go see things. I got to see a black concert pianist when I was a young girl. Also got to go to St. Louis Cardinals baseball games. Awesome. But like I said, we grew up with a lot of reading material in the house. One of my favorite things to do was to go to the library on Saturday. I know that sounds geeky, but I would take out as many books as they would let me, and I'd read them in a hurry, and so I could go back and get some more the next Saturday. Well, I'll tell you about the library in East St. Louis right now. My husband, who's here with me today, we drove back to visit, and the library has been closed for the last 10 years. And not only closed, they literally locked the doors and left everything in it because the city was unable to find the funds to pay librarians or to even, quite frankly, figure out how to store the books. So our longtime resident told me, yeah, the books are still in there. That's unbelievable that the kids in that city don't even have a public library to go to and take out books. So that's kind of the beginning of my journey. But obviously it didn't end there. Over 35 years ago, as I was telling the cadets, yes, I graduated from college in 1979. Yes, I'm proud. But I joined a Reserve Officers Training Corps. Quite frankly, as I shared this with the cadets earlier, I needed a science credit. I was a political science major. I had 2 jobs. I had work study, I worked at night, I couldn't take astronomy, and I needed a science credit to fulfill that basic requirement. Well, I went to registration, and again, for you young folks, back in the old days, we used to go to like hot, stuffy places like a gym, line up, and sign up for classes. The faculty and staff are laughing because they know that's true. And you hoped you got the class you wanted and you didn't get closed out. Well, lo and behold, I'm in that hot, stuffy gym looking around for a line that isn't impossible, and the only line where there was no one was the Military Science ROTC department. Hey, sign me up. So that's how I signed up. But I stayed for a lot of other reasons. I hadn't had a lot of opportunities growing up where I did to do a lot of leadership type things. Because again, you young folks, this was back in the 70s. Women we didn't have sports teams. We didn't have all those kinds of opportunities to lead or to learn how to participate and work with a group. So ROTC offered me that opportunity. They compel you to learn about being a leader. They give you the opportunity to excel. They explain how to do this to you. They make you test yourself. And then they give you great constructive feedback. So the next time you lead, you do better. And so for me, that was really great. Because beyond that opportunity, the only thing I really had when I was in college, and this is no slam on my college, was a speech class. Anybody here remember your first speech? Oh, it was awful. I thought I was going to die. But that was the one opportunity I got to be in front of a group of people, express an idea, and make sure that I was communicating well. But I had more of those opportunities as a part of being in ROTC, and that was great, and that kind of started me on my way. As Patrick said, I attended a number of military schools because that's a requirement to get promoted in the military. Doesn't matter if you're a sergeant, a warrant officer, who are our technical specialists, or an officer. You can't go to the next level without completing a degree, and you can't become a general officer in any branch of the military without having a master's degree. Basic as a master's degree. So I'm talking about all of that just to tell you that in spite of the zip code, 62205, where I started, and the low expectations I would expect that most people had when they saw me, I've managed to excel. And I think the bottom line is that all of us had that opportunity to excel. A lot of it, of course, is a function of people believing in you, providing you with the opportunities and the challenges. But the other part is about you stepping up. When you're given a challenge, you step up and you make it happen. Now, there's a number of people in here who know what I'm about to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the military, because I know there may be some unfamiliarity in this room with the military. I know everybody watches a lot of TV and History Channel and John Wayne Green Beret movies. Yep, that's what you think about. So you see military folks, they're blowing stuff up, driving around really big equipment. But that's a small part of at least the branch of the military I'm in the Army. We have a lot of doctors. We have a lot of logisticians. We move bigger stuff than FedEx or UPS ever thinks about moving. Believe me. We move things on ships. We're the people that showed up in Haiti when they needed some help to get their port open, when they had women who had no place to go who were delivering babies. And right now, in the Washington area, in Maryland, we have young military people who are working to find and develop a vaccine for Ebola. So when you see those guys running around knocking in doors and stuff, there's about 6 or 7 people behind each of them doing all those things that I just described. And on top of that, there's roads that have been constructed in places like South America. Folks in the Army National Guard and Army Reserve and the Army, we did that. The Navy Seabees, they did that. Those people you saw helping construct those medical facilities in Africa, those are your military. That's your military. That's what we do. And we have people who are drilling wells. We have vaccinated thousands of animals in parts of Africa where that cow or that pig is important to that family because that's part of it. So we've helped vaccinate them. And when you saw on television the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing, and you saw people who were running away and you saw people running too, a lot of them were veterans. And when those individuals who were injured were taken to those trauma centers in Boston, a lot of those ER docs, they were former military docs or current, and they learned about that kind of medicine as a result of their military experience. So you benefit in ways large and small from your military. So I just wanted to paint a different picture than maybe you see on the nightly news. There's a whole lot of stuff that's going on, and I appreciate your support for that. And I hope that listening to this, you'll go share some of what I just shared with other people, because you're sailors, your airmen, your Marines, your soldiers, your Coast Guardsmen. Oh gosh, there was one. Well, we got one. You know, they make it happen. And they start out by learning that as young cadets, and we do it at basic training. One little fact I want to leave you with, a little factoid. Way back in my career, I ran a basic training company, and they didn't do it then, but they do it now. Our basic trainees, those 18 to 25-year-old kids that you try to kick off the couch, before they graduate, they have to know how to start an IV. And I had a friend, who was a one-star general, who participated in a training exercise, and one of those young people started an IV on her. Why? Because we have to maximize that golden hour when someone is injured. And if you wait for someone to come and start an IV, you may lose a soldier. So they learn a lot in basic training, and they meet a lot of different people. They learn a lot of different things. We try to make them as culturally competent as possible before we send them into South America or Africa or any other place. I think that's diversity and inclusion at its best. That's the end of my not-so-brief commercial about the military. I also want to talk about very, very quickly, or not so quickly, some of the things I think you can do to support your student veterans here on campus. And I know there's a lot of student veterans here, that some who are not present at this discussion, but who you may encounter. And I know there's maybe a lot of myths out there, concerns that because of some of the experiences they've had, they may not be, they may have challenges. Well, true, they may have challenges, but it also has made them much more resilient. I think they can add a richness to the discussions in your classrooms. And it's going to continue to grow as our military downsizes. I think you're going to see more people who leave the military for whatever reason who are going to want to go on and pursue their education. Just another quick fact. I think there may be a perception from all those World War II movies we've seen that it's not a highly educated military force. 98% of the people that we take into the Army have a high school diploma. We have a large percentage of people with associate's degrees, and I actually had a senior sergeant work for me. He's what we would call a master sergeant. He had a PhD in organizational design. He'd start talking to me, and I'd say, "You lost me at the." I have no idea what you're talking about. But that's who's in your military. That's who's in your military. But you've got a lot of veterans here on campus. And I know because you care about them as students and as your friends, and some of them are your mentees, you will say, what can I do to help them if I see them struggling? Obviously, we have a great VA here. We have a great VA here in Madison, Wisconsin. But if you see somebody and you say, I want to help, or I'm a family member who wants to help, I'll make one recommendation for a peer counseling hotline that I'm extremely familiar with, and I've referred lots of people to it, family members and members of the military. It's run by a retired two-star general that I happen to know. I worked for him for years. And it's called Vets for, the number 4, Warriors. It's a free service. So if you want to refer somebody to it, as I said, whether it's a family member or a veteran, I encourage you to do so. They will immediately talk to a peer counselor, meaning someone who else was served, who's been there, done that, got a couple of those T-shirts, and can connect with them on a personal level and help them out. I think, as I said, they're going to add value to your classroom if you're a faculty member. So draw on their experiences. They may be different than younger students because they're going to question things because they've been in situations where they had to question things or they wouldn't be sitting in front of you today. They're going to be resilient. They're going to have different ways of looking at things. They're going to be creative, maybe in ways you never expected. And part of that is because of a lot of the values that we impress on our young service members as soon as they join. It's about, there is no I in team. We really mean that. It's about being good at what you do because I need to turn around and know that the person behind me is on top of their game. It's about appreciating each other as individuals and transcending a lot of that race and class stuff because we don't have time for it because we're working in cubicles, we're sleeping in tents, we're in very difficult conditions, and if you think it's about something other than the team, we're going to figure that out pretty quickly, and we're going to probably pretty much marginalize you because you're not going to help us get our job done. It also it also compels us to strive for excellence, because it's truly important that we do a really good job, no matter what the job is. If you're the person who drives the truck, if you're the person who loads or unloads that boat, you're the person drilling a well, if you're a nurse, you're a clinician, whatever you do, you have to do it to the utmost of your ability. And since it's Veterans Day, I'm going to shift here a little bit and a little bit of a history lesson. You know, this year marks the 100th anniversary of World War I. And there's some great displays. I hope you got a chance to look at those on your way in. If you don't, check them out on your way out. That was our first real test of our military and engaging with across the ocean in a strange place and working with other world powers. And I've had an opportunity to meet not some of the World War I veterans, but a lot of the World War II veterans and our Vietnam and Korean War veterans. And I don't think they're any different than our Afghan or our Iraqi veterans, except in one respect. The people that I just mentioned prior to Iraq and Afghanistan were draftees. Every single person I serve with today in the military is a volunteer, And we all know that after 9/11, a lot of those volunteers signed up knowing full well what they might be getting into. So I have a great deal of respect for this generation of young people who make that decision. But they've come back home. I am grateful to you for honoring their commitment by your being here present today, but also the activities that you've been conducting on campus. That honors not just the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, but it honors the former veterans as well. And the last thing I want to talk about with regard to diversity and the value and how all of what I just talked about is not just important to us as you as a university community, but it's important to us as a country. We have to do a better job. We have to take some of the lessons learned that I've just described from where I grew up and from what our young people have learned as they spend time abroad in conflict about themselves and about other cultures. If we're going to continue to excel and succeed as a country, we have to leverage everyone's talents. And my husband's going to be annoyed when I do this, but I do it at a number of forums. A few years ago, I was going to give a speech, and I was struggling with a title for it. And he helped me come up with the title. And it's something that I talk about constantly, and what I'm kind of going to right now is, if you're not at the table, then you are on the menu. Okay? If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. That doesn't just mean in the military. That means in your local organizations, state and local and higher, organizations that you may not necessarily agree with. Because I'm fully aware there may be some people in the audience here today who really have a difficult time with the military and what our ultimate mission is. But you're never going to change that organization if you don't have more people who look like me in it to ask some of the uncomfortable questions. And believe me, I have asked uncomfortable questions in my 35 years. Most of the time because I didn't know any better, but because I wanted us to get to a different place. I wanted to avoid groupthink because we all looked alike, we all thought alike, we all came from the same background. So it's important for our major institutions in this country and our local institutions to reflect the diversity and the richness of the people who have immigrated here and those of us who grew up here. So I'm going to conclude. So I do want to leave as much time as possible for Q&A. I've talked about the rapidly changing dynamics and the importance that we pay point that we pay attention to those. We learn from those. We leverage all these people. Because, yeah, friction can be uncomfortable. Conflict can be uncomfortable. But I prefer to think of it as healthy debate and engaging and getting new ideas and figuring out better ways of doing things. I don't want to keep doing things the same way because we all know sometimes that's a little bit of insanity. You expect a different result if you keep doing things the same way. I'm I'm just going to skip to my conclusion, basically, because I do want to leave time for questions. I think I'm an example of what I talked about at the beginning of this speech. It's not where you start. It's where you end up. I got there with a lot of support. I got there also because I was determined to succeed and excel. I'll admit in this forum, and I know this is being taped, I actually flunked kindergarten. It took me 2 years to get out of kindergarten in Beloit. It did. And I know kindergarten was all about coloring back then and graham crackers and milk, but I somehow managed to fail doing that. But that kind of drove me. As I got older, I resented that. And I thought, I'm older than most of my classmates. And when I went to first grade, you know, the predictable happened. The people who I'd been in kindergarten with, who are now in second grade, cornered me on the playground, poked me in the chest, and made fun of me. And that just made me mad. And so from then on, in addition to the support I had from my family, I was determined to prove them all wrong, and certainly to prove, I won't use her name, my kindergarten teacher flunked me, to prove her that she was wrong about me. Because here's why I'm telling you that story. There were only 2 little black kids in my kindergarten class, me and a little boy. I don't think either one of us made it out the first year. And then when I went to first grade, they put me in back in the days when you grouped kids. Remember those groups, reading groups? Well, I was in the dreaded D reading group, which was the slow kids. But I've been labeled. But I also think it was because it wasn't a diverse enough group for the teacher to appreciate each and every one of us as an individual, to appreciate our talents, and to avoid, as I said, putting me in the slow reading group. It's just, I didn't belong there. And if I had succumbed to that label, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. So that's why I think it's important to be as diverse and inclusive as we possibly can be. Because if I had succumbed to that label, I wouldn't have been able to make some of the contributions that I've been very proud and happy to make to my community and to this country. So it just makes me work all the harder, and again, that's why I'm so thankful that you asked me to speak, because this is near and dear to my heart, because it personally affected me. And I can tell you a lot more about my family and some of their trials and tribulations and some of the barriers that were put in front of them and some of the dreams they had to defer because of what they look like or their gender. But I won't. I will leave some time for questions. I want to thank you as a community for engaging in this 2-day discussion. I want to thank you for enduring a really warm room, and I'm under the lights and in this suit, so you know I'm hot. But I really, really, really appreciate your presence. I appreciate, again, your support for veterans. Before I close, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the color guard to stand and be recognized. Come on, stand up. Thank you, and as I said, somebody in that group's going to be a general officer someday, so you guys are looking on, you just remember their faces. You're going to see them again. But again, thank you for allowing me to share with you. I look forward to your questions, and again, we provided cards for those who may not want to stand up in this forum and ask. And please, nothing's off limits, although I can't guarantee I'll answer it, but I'll do my best. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, in regards to your career in the military and being a minority as a female and African American, what would you say was a great obstacle that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. She wants to know, based on my background in the military and my experiences, what was the biggest obstacle I had to overcome, and how did I overcome it? Well, there probably are a couple I could choose from. But one I would say was sometimes a personal lack of self-confidence. I wasn't really sure I could do this thing. I didn't really know at the time that my father had served in the Korean War because he never talked about it. So I didn't have anybody really in my family other than one uncle who volunteered. He wasn't drafted. He volunteered for the Marines during Vietnam. But he didn't talk about his experience. So I didn't really have a military background. I didn't come from a military family. So I sometimes wasn't sure of how to act, what to say. We have a lot of regulations in the military, but they were so dry, I didn't read them. They're just dry. But I overcame that by realizing that just because I had a college degree, it didn't mean I was the smartest person in the room. And by that I mean there were sergeants who worked for me, what you would call supervisors or members of a team, who'd been around a long time, and I would ask them questions. And I learned early on they were only too happy to provide me with support and mentoring. And I'm still friends with a lot of those people today. I call them my little posse. They're still out there on email, and I still ask them for advice. So overcoming my own lack of knowledge about the organization, and I think that kind of translates to the private sector, to business, to your first job. You know, just because, you know, Joe is in the mailroom doesn't mean Joe doesn't know where the bodies are buried. And Joe may have some, as my grandmother would have said, mother wit that he or she could share with you to help you, you know, navigate the politics and that organization and learn how to become a good member of the team. So I guess the basic thing is, yes, you may have some self-doubt, but you've got resources out there that can help you. Sir.
Were you ever at a point where you heard, saw, or witnessed something you felt in the military was that one of your peers, colleagues, subordinates was doing that was unethical?
Okay.
And how did you handle it?
Okay, the question was whether there was any time during my military career I observed or saw a situation or a colleague who was doing something that was unethical and how I responded. I told them. Very early on, back when I was a younger officer, there were instances where I saw individuals who were behaving in a manner that I thought was unbecoming, especially for an officer. And even though I was junior to them, I went and told them. Did I pay for that? Yeah. But I also discovered those same sergeants I mentioned to you, they saw what I was trying to do. They knew I was trying to do the right thing. And I'll just say that they talked to that individual on my behalf, and because they saw I was trying to be a good officer and look out for people and report things. And I have reported people, and there are some people who are no longer in the military because I took the initiative to report them. We have something in the military called the Inspector General's office, and there's a hotline, actually at the Department of Defense, that anyone can call and report. So if you want to do it anonymously, that's the way to do it. I will tell you in my entire career, I've only filed one complaint that way. The rest of the time, I just confronted it head on because, again, I didn't know any better. Somebody else?
Got a couple of questions on card.
Oh, sure, that's great.
You want to just read it?
Yes.
Okay. Given the high number of women that are victims of sexual assault in the armed forces, would you encourage your daughter, or have you done, would you encourage your daughter to join? If so, what advice would you give her prior to joining?
All right, that's a very good question, and I'll just repeat it again. You know, the person is talking about the number of sexual harassment incidents that have been reported in the military, and whether or not I would encourage my daughter to join. That kind of goes back to, well, first I'll talk about what we've done to address that. Something that, I think I can share it in this forum. After the Chief of Staff of the Army, who's General Ray Odierno, had heard all these reports and kind of sent a query out on his social media as to whether or not what he was hearing was true. He was flooded, he said, with responses from old and current service members. And it prompted him, it moved him so much, he called an emergency meeting of all his senior officers the next day via VTC, worldwide, phone, to talk about his concerns and that we needed to be aggressive about this. Because, again, you can't be a successful organization if there are people who feel marginalized. And we're committed to being a successful organization for you and for the people that each one of us as a senior person is responsible for. So We took aggressive action. We are continuing to address this, talk about it, encourage it, people to be open and report it. We've revised our reporting procedures to provide more protections for those individuals. Because we know as he described it, it's something we have to cut out of our organization. It has no place in it. And so I would encourage my daughter, yes, to join because of the changes I've just mentioned, but also because of my firm belief that we have to have a critical mass of people in an organization that are diverse. Otherwise, the organization doesn't reflect what this room looks like or this country looks like, and it's not going to be successful. So again, and it's almost impossible to change an organization this large from the outside. So if you're going to, I think, at least from my perspective, create change and lasting, sustainable change, you have to be inside the organization to do that, and that means women and minorities.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was great. I just want to ask, as being a mom, I often find it hard to advance my career while also being a great mom. I wonder if you could please speak to that, how you did that.
The question was, she wants me to address how to be a great mom, because she's a great mom, I believe you, and also advance your career. I kind of inherited children. I have stepchildren, but I have a lot of friends who are moms who try to manage, and I'm not going to go, Sheryl Sandberg on you and go about leaning in and stuff like that. But she's going to call me probably. But in any event, there are ways. I mean, the best thing I can kind of, use to kind of parallel that is I'm a citizen soldier. So I have a full-time civilian career and job, and then I have a part-time military, sometimes it's the last 2 years it was full-time in the Pentagon career that I had to balance. It's about communication with everybody in your life, and my husband would tell you I'm not always good at that. But it's about communicating early and often. It's about also communicating when you have to make those hard choices about attending that family event, or you've got to be away on military duty. Or you are a business person and you've got to go to that meeting and you can't attend your child's recital. You're going to communicate to those people in your life how important they are, and that you've done all you can to balance that. This time you won't be able to make it, but you will the next time. And the whole time you're wherever you are, you're going to be thinking about them. And it's worked for a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my friends. That's how you kind of have to do it. It's a balance. You don't always get it perfect. You don't always get it right. But you just keep trying. And certainly as a parent, you got to have a great support network. And as I mentioned earlier, military families are very strong and supportive. And I think if you're not a military family, you know how to do it. You can do it too.
Yes, one more question. Always remember, what are a few recruitment strategies the Armed Forces is using to diversify that will be applicable to higher education?
Whoa, that's a steep. I don't know if I'm even qualified to answer that. But the question was, what are some recruiting strategies that the Armed Forces are using that would be applicable to higher education? We have realized, I think, in the military that some of our recruiting strategies are pretty old school. I mean, we were expecting to get a 21st century force using 20th century techniques and tactics. We're looking at communicating with certain communities where we really didn't have a very good foothold. Communities of color, LGBT communities. I'll tell you, the very first thing that I saw the day after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was lifted was on the front page of the New York Times. Some Marine Corps recruiters had gone to an LGBT community center and set up shop. They were going to recruit. I was like, you go, guys. Hoorah, you go. So you go places that you haven't gone before and talk to communities that you haven't engaged with. And also find people, in many cases, we leverage, we call, in the Army Reserve, we call them ambassadors. But we have who are members of the community who are either business leaders. You work with people who you consider centers of influence in a community. whether that's your religious community or your small business people or your chamber of commerce or minority professional organizations and women's organizations. And you communicate with those individuals and indicate your desire to have them be part of your institution. I mean, those are some, I think, not unconventional, because I think private sector has already gotten that message. But for us as a large institution in the Department of Defense, we've had to learn some new methods. We've fully embraced social media. I still don't know what all that stuff is, but I'm trying. So you embrace and leverage a lot of those tools that are available to you. And then just get out into the community. One of the unfortunate results of our cost-saving measure, when we reduced the number of military installations in the country, because obviously some of them were old, outdated, and expensive to maintain, was it also reduced our footprint in the community. So many people have no military installations nearby, so they don't know anybody, they don't see anybody in the military. They may see people like me who are in the Reserve or Guard. One of my friends is the Adjutant General for the state of Iowa, and he calls his state Fort Iowa, because there are no federal military installations in Iowa except for the Guard and the Reserve. So that kind of pulled us back from the community, and so people don't know or understand what we do. And there's a lot of misperceptions, which I talked about earlier, and tried to dispel some of those notions. So it's about engagement in the community. It's explaining better who we are and what we do. One of the things I always used to tell the general who was in charge of advertising many years ago and marketing for the military is, I said, sir, with all due respect, you keep showing the same commercial. And I said, and you're recruiting someone who's known since they were 4 and they had their first GI Joe that they wanted to do this. I said, you should show people who are doing robotics. You should show the people I talked about earlier who are helping develop a vaccine for Ebola. You should show the people who are on our hospital ships when they were down in Haiti, helping people and taking care of people there. You should show our people who, as I said, load and unload ships and move, heavy equipment you can't believe, or go into places and build roads where, the construction companies here would probably go, oh, no, thank you very much. You should show those people, because that's how you educate the community. And again, we have to absolutely leverage every single person, because as I said earlier, and maybe I didn't say this, only 4 in 10 young people in this country is even eligible to be a member of the armed services, because they're either overweight, they don't test well, you got to be able to have a degree, high school diploma rather, or for some other reason they can't. And we're competing for those 4 people with every other institution in this country, public institutions and private institutions. We're all competing for those 4 people. So it's tough. So we have to be creative. Sir.
Ma'am, with the Army currently downsizing, how do we maintain or grow the percentage of minorities and women in the Army to keep a diverse Army when they're competing for peer response?
Okay. The question is how, with the downsizing that's going on across actually not just the Army, but across the entire armed services, how are we going to maintain a diverse workforce? In addition to some of the things I described earlier, we recognize we don't have a lot of ROTC programs in certain markets. We've got a lot in the South. We don't have a lot in the East. I mean, I don't even think Fordham has one. The PMS could probably tell me the answer to that. But institutions like that, we need to reach out to those, you may consider non-traditional institutions, and encourage people to pursue it as a leadership opportunity. And people also may have a misperception that, once you join up for ROTC, you have to go on active duty. You can choose to go into the Guard or Reserve, and you'll still be serving. But you've also gotten the benefit of those leadership opportunities in that training. So we need to reach out, and I think, this is just me, this is my personal opinion, I'm in charge of marketing for the Army or recruiting, but we need to start leveraging more of those opportunities and to encourage young people. One little known and little understood opportunity, as someone mentioned last night at an event I attended, is the fact that here in the state of Wisconsin, we don't have a lot of people who are vying for any of the seats at any of our service colleges. By that I mean West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. I think we've got great kids here in Wisconsin. And, you know, quite frankly, that's a $400,000 education. And they walk out the door ready to lead. And a lot of 22-year-olds are going to get their own cubicle, but a lot of the 22-year-olds who graduate from those institutions will get 40 people, a couple $1 million worth of equipment and resources they have to manage from day one. 5 years later, who would you want to hire? I'll tell you who I would hire. If they decide not to stay in the military, I'd hire that young captain getting out of the Army or the Air Force. I'd hire them in a heartbeat because they've had a lot of leadership experience. So, you know, hopefully somebody somewhere will see this and they will be encouraged to think about that. I'll tell you that in terms of diversity, the Navy has recently, well, they recently confirmed their first African-American woman 4-star. Admiral Michelle Howard. She's an Annapolis graduate, and she and I are 1-stars together. Clearly, she left me in her dust. And she is currently the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, which means she is the second highest ranking naval officer. And, you know, hey, she could be the Chief of Naval Operations someday, but who knows? But yes, we are moving forward. We are making strides. But again, we've got to have that critical mass coming up the ranks to put the pressure on, I'll put it that way, to put the pressure on so we continue to be forward-thinking, go Wisconsin, forward-thinking, and that, you know, we really, really have the kind of organization that makes us all proud.
I think we have time for one more question.
Actually, no, we don't.
Are we done?
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
The Chancellor's on a schedule, and she's coming up next. Feel free to hang around. We will, after the Chancellor speaks, I invite you to remain with us to witness the retiring of the color guard. Afterwards, there will be a reception in the lobby. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you again, Major General Anderson, for being with us, for sharing us your story. I unfortunately have a similar experience compared to yours. I flunked 2nd grade, right? But there was another factor involved, and so I was able to get back on track. I didn't have to wait the full year. But with that said, I'd like to now extend an opportunity to our Chancellor, who has been a champion on many of these issues before coming to us, and she's with us now, and she's still a champion on these issues. So please join me in welcome Chancellor Rebecca Blank.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and good afternoon. It is wonderful to see the crowd here today. I've heard you had a good couple of days here at the forum, and I realize I'm the only thing that stands between you and the reception, so I will be relatively brief. I want to say a word of thanks to Major General Marcia Anderson, not only for her inspiring remarks here today, but for her service to our nation and for spending this Veterans Day with us. I suspect she had a number of speaking invitations on Veterans Day. I am very proud that the first ever African-American woman to achieve the rank of Major General in the United States Army Reserve hails from Wisconsin. So, General Anderson, thank you. We're very honored you're here today. I also want to extend my gratitude and my thanks to all the students, faculty, and staff here at the university who are veterans, or active duty military, or who have family who are serving in the armed forces. We honor your courage, your dedication, and your sacrifice here on November 11th, and I hope throughout the year. I am told that this is the 16th annual Campus Diversity Forum, and this year marks an important milestone, the completion of the Framework for Diversity, which all 4 shared governance entities have vetted, and I suspect there are a number of people in the room who worked on building that framework last year. That means we're now at the point of needing to implement, to actually do something, having talked about it for a year. The framework contains 30 recommendations. Most of those are pretty major suggestions for action, and you can't do 30 things at once and do them well. So we've spent some time this summer prioritizing, and in some cases grouping these recommendations together. And this fall, we are working in collaboration with groups across campus to address 14 of those recommendations. The Office of the Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer has appointed 6 committees of faculty, staff, and students to go to work, developing implementation plans, exploring costs, setting timelines, and creating the yardsticks by which we'll measure progress. And those are all due by the end of this year. Our framework is much more than just an update to the 2008 plan. It's more than just a checklist of steps to be taken. It's a call for action based on the larger goals of this institution. The recommendations are not the responsibility of just Patrick's office or of one committee or of any particular individual on this campus. We all have a role to play in improving faculty, staff, and student diversity, and in creating, evaluating, and amending policies and processes to support the important changes that make a real and measurable difference. Creating a more diverse and a more inclusive campus is one of our campus's 6 major strategic goals laid out, I think, 5 years ago, and that's as it should be. We care about diversity because this is an absolutely essential part of any education in the 21st century. All of our students need the experience of living and working with a wide mix of people. You heard the earlier speakers talk about changing demographics. There is no question that the ability to understand and work with people of different viewpoints, experiences, and beliefs is ever more important in succeeding in a global society and an increasingly global economy. And of course, the educational value of diversity is not limited to just racial or ethnic or gender lines. It includes urban-rural differences, differences of sexual identity, international diversity, differences in political perspectives. I could keep going. The framework does a lovely job of talking about diversity in that larger framework as well. Living in a more diverse environment also contributes to intellectual rigor. A key part of education is to figure out how to explain and perhaps even defend your viewpoints to people who come from very different backgrounds. And if you aren't in a diverse environment, you never have that chance. Diversity gives us a competitive advantage. Universities that can attract a broad mix of faculty, staff, and students from across the state, the nation, and the world are better positioned to compete for the best and brightest in the next year of faculty, staff, and students. Finally, for those aspects of more traditional diversity that relate to race, ethnicity, gender, income, our role as a public institution means that we have a commitment to providing opportunity for all. It's our responsibility to make sure that as many children as possible have the opportunity to go to college, whatever their family income, whatever the color of their skin, or whatever the place where their parents were born. We've made some real progress on diversity at the University of Wisconsin. As I've said in a number of places, we're doing okay, but we're not where we need to be, and there is plenty of work to be done to move from okay to very good, much less to excellent. Implementing this new framework is going to help us move in the right direction. That said, let me talk a little about what we have achieved, and that should not be dismissed. Many people on this campus, again, many of them in this room, have worked hard on diversity issues for many years, and there are indeed fruits to be seen to their labors. First, we are building and maintaining a diverse student body. The new freshman class is one of our diverse ever, and the number of applicants from students of color were up again this year. Students of color comprise just over 16% of our new freshman class, making this one of the most diverse classes in UW history and continuing last year's trend. Over 10% of those are from historically disadvantaged minorities. This is also the most internationally diverse class in at least a decade. Students have come to us from 42 countries outside of the United States. International students comprise 6% of our student body. Retention has also improved. Among targeted minority freshmen who enrolled in fall 2012, 94% were retained. That compares to 88% more than 10 years ago. And graduation rates are up. The 6-year graduation rate for targeted minority students was nearly 73% in the 2013-14 school year, up from just under 70% a few years ago. The 6-year graduation rate among participants in some of our targeted programs, Chancellor Scholars, Power NAP, POSSE programs, is now higher than 85%, slightly better than our overall 6-year graduation rate among other students. Second, our faculty is increasingly diverse. Since 2003, we've had more than a 4% increase in minority faculty. Is that enough? No, but it's a movement in the right direction. Currently, about 19% of UW-Madison faculty self-report as racial and ethnic minorities. Earlier this year, we welcomed 31 new faculty of color. They came from around the country and joined schools and colleges across campus. Our successful recruitment of faculty of color is built on 2 decades of diligent work by faculty, staff, and leadership to advance our diversity strategies. Among the most successful of these was the Faculty Diversity Initiative launched in 2010. That gives us pipeline development grants and competitive recruitment supplements, which enhance the ability of departments throughout the university to recruit and support diverse faculty. And I've committed to continuing this initiative in the years ahead. Thirdly, in addition to students and faculty, we're building a more inclusive campus climate that provides opportunities for different groups to come together. The Multicultural Learning Center, begun in 2002, is one example. The MLC is a program for students of all backgrounds who choose to live together and participate in discussions on issues of race, class, and socioeconomic status. MLC is one of 3 learning communities on campus. The others have focused on issues of gender and sexuality and on world cultures. All 3 grew out of UW's 10-year diversity plan starting in 1998. And finally, the PEOPLE program, that stands for Pre-College Enrichment Opportunity Program for Learning Excellence, sounds better just as the acronym. PEOPLE is our largest pipeline for bringing underrepresented, economically disadvantaged Wisconsin students to UW. PEOPLE celebrates its 15th anniversary this year, and I'm proud to tell you it's enrolled 827 students here at UW-Madison in those 15 years. PEOPLE target students who might not otherwise envision themselves going to college. It works in lower-income Milwaukee and Madison schools, as well as some of the tribal schools, and focuses on middle and high schools. It works with students, with families, with teachers, with counselors to provide intensive college prep and to give students a feel for what happens at college. It brings students to campus. And many of you know, if you grow up in a family where no one has ever gone to college, the University of Wisconsin here at Madison just seems like a foreign land. And bringing people here and giving them some exposure is an incredibly important part of that program. Right now, there are 935 students in the pipeline and 349 PEOPLE scholars enrolled here today. 114 of them, including 54 women, I might note, are majoring in STEM fields. Once the students are here, of course, we need to provide the support that lets them achieve their academic goals. And I should note that 21 of the 327 who have graduated from here as PEOPLE scholars have gone on to earn graduate degrees at Wisconsin as well. There's much to celebrate, but as these numbers indicate to anyone who knows the data, we have a lot of work to be done. Every one of the initiatives that I've mentioned requires ongoing and focused attention to continue to flourish, and many more worthy projects at this point are just ideas, waiting for the funding, the people, the right moment to move them forward. I'm looking forward to implementing some of the recommendations in the diversity framework. Some will involve new efforts, others will expand existing efforts. But as we move forward, I hope we honor the legacies of the many University of Wisconsin trailblazers who have broken down barriers ahead of us. For instance, Belle Case La Follette, the first woman to graduate from the UW Law School in 1885. Vel Phillips, the first African-American woman to graduate from the law school. How much longer? 1951. The members of the 1958 Badger basketball team who took action after black members of the team were barred from staying at the same hotel as their white teammates on a trip to play Rice University in Houston. The athletic board responded with a new policy that simply said Badgers can't play unless everyone plays. And finally, one of the greatest trailblazers of them all, the late great Professor Nellie McKay, a distinguished scholar and critic who helped secure a place for African-American women in the modern literary canon and who lobbied universities across the United States to produce more faculty of color. Professor McKay didn't just talk about the problem, she did something about it. She created the Bridge program to bring students into the African American Studies master's track into the English department's PhD program, to build that bridge from undergraduate to master's to PhD. That program continues to provide fellowships that enable qualified candidates to pursue doctoral studies around the United States. Our work to advance equity and diversity on this campus honors all of these individuals and many, many more on whose shoulders we stand. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. instructed us that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? My challenge to all of us here today is, how do we harness the energy, the ideas, and the commitment that's here in this room to do even more for others, to be a more diverse and inclusive campus? If we keep asking that question, make no mistake, working on diversity is a process, not an end game. If we keep asking that question and we keep working on the answers, we will truly honor the legacy of so many proud Badgers who are here before us over the years. Thank you very much for being part of this forum, and thanks again to General Anderson for being part of our inspirational speaking event here after lunch. I look forward to seeing you all at the reception. Thank you.
Well, we've reached the end of the forum, y'all. I want to take this opportunity to again reiterate my thanks to all of you. I've been informed that actually the color guard will not retire the colors. So feel free to join us in the lobby and take a look at the display. And again, thank you to our keynote, both the Chancellor and Major General Marcia Anderson, for being with us. And thank you all for an amazing, amazing two-day experience to think and engage around issues of diversity and inclusion. My sense is we need to do this again, huh? Yeah? Thank you all. Have a good one.